Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
How does an out-of-the-body experience actually work? Did the CIA really suppress a story about Adam and Eve? Could the proverbial paranormal cold spot be a sign of the multiverse?
Hello, and welcome to the 894th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I am Ben, and those interesting and many questions came from my co-host, partner in the paranormal, and my dad, Paul. And I'm Ben, and we're coming to you live from WOON AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app, from TalkStream Live, and on TuneIn.com.
First of all, a very happy Mother's Day to everyone in all our countries where it's being celebrated, U.S., Canada, Australia, UK, etc. Today we bring you the first of two back-to-back open line shows, very much needed because we're all backed up with questions. With the one and only... What?
When are we not?
Right. And today we have the one and only Rick Eno sitting in for Shane Sirois. Rick is our trusty cousin, a certified investigator for the Mutual UFO Network, and our show's Northern California reporter. He comes to us today via Skype from the San Francisco area. So, Rick, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks. It's great to be here. And again, mom-tastic Mother's Day to all those wonderful moms out there.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get right to it. We have an email here from our show reporter, Phil, who's right at the heart of the Litchfield, Connecticut area FLAP, the Connecticut FLAP we've been working on for 16 years. And let's see what Phil has to say today.
Sure thing. So, Phil writes to us, sometimes at FLAP areas, military or police-like officials come out of the wilderness to tell people to leave in no uncertain terms. Who or what are these military or police-like officials? Who do they work for? Are they even human?
Well, that's a big question there. We have lots of stories, particularly from that area, of people seeming to come out of nowhere in some sort of uniforms, asking people to avoid certain regions. I'm thinking of Mark D'Antonio, who was a very, very well-known figure in the UFO community, an astronomer, and also one of our occasional co-hosts on the show here, is from that area. And he remembers a friend of his saying that he was going down to fish at a brook he'd fished at all his life. And all of a sudden, a Humvee pulls up with fellows in black clothing and armed with M16 rifles, he thought, and all of a sudden you've got an order to leave the area and not to return. Other people, particularly in 2009, 2010, when the military presence was very prominent in that area and they didn't care who knew it, people were having the same thing. They'd walk to the edge of their property and be told to turn back, that sort of thing. But the question is, was this really the military? Was it private security? Who is it or what is it? The idea of them even being human is a legitimate question that came out of several cases from the 1960s, particularly the Mothman incidents of 65 through 67. And people would show up at people's doors with very strange-looking people, sometimes in military uniforms with the insignia in the wrong places, that sort of thing. And that was a question of, were these aliens? I mean, who knows? Or were they people from other parallel realities? On several occasions, there were reports of these people visiting a home, and there would be an ashtray, for example, if anybody remembers ashtrays, on someone's desk. And all of a sudden, there would be a great curiosity on the part of this person, and they would ask if they could take it, or a pen, or a pencil, as if they'd never seen anything like that before. If they'd go delighted as if they had some kind of valuable antique or something. Very, very strange. So Phil's questions are very apt, but who knows the answer, really. There you go.
I believe we have Chris DiPerno on the line.
Oh, we have Chris DiPerno, the assistant, the MUFON director of the state of California, is with us today. Distinct honor. And we're going to turn this over to Rick, because Rick is conversant in the case and with Chris. They speak the same language. They are from the West Coast, after all. So, Chris, welcome to the show, and welcome to WOON Radio, and we're going to turn you over to Rick.
Oh,
Hey, Chris.
thank you for
Hey,
having
dude,
me.
let me clarify first. Chris is the Assistant State Director to New York.
Oh, New York. I'm sorry.
Yes.
So he's in our neck of the woods. All right.
He's a 30-year retired police officer detective there as well. He's amazing wealth of knowledge. So good morning, Chris.
Good morning to you. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers in your life.
That's right, and happy Mother's Day to all your listeners out there. What a great day it is.
That's great. Thanks, Chris.
Okay. Chris, I'm going to get started with, we had a question from, we have a trusted friend in Bogota, Colombia, who wrote in and was curious about the report where a UFO was seen dumping barrels into a lake in your area. Can you expand upon that and what is actually you've uncovered or anything you can share? I understand it is an active case, but anything you can share around that and what you discovered?
Absolutely. Love to share it to your listeners. Well, first of all, what we did was we had a report from a very credible eyewitness whistleblower who led us down to the Hudson Valley area. And we discovered that he witnessed a triangle dump a barrel-sized object into this particular lake. And there's been some change in the lake during the past year that we've taken some water samples from. It appears they've gotten now a deadly altitude going on there, and they shouldn't have. There's really no reason why they should have that. So the composition of the lake showed a tremendous amount of nitrates and phosphorus things that because there's no runoff. And the people there don't use fertilizers and things of that nature near enough to the lake where the runoff should affect it. So we're delving into that right now. But the eyewitness basically saw a triangle hover over the lake, dump a barrel-sized object into it, and then I guess a few days later, other people saw lights in the lake moving around at a very rapid speed. And so I went down to investigate, and sure enough, I was a skeptic at first. I said, yeah, right, okay. But I stood out on the dock, and I actually watched an object hover right over the lake, and I can't explain what it is. It wasn't a drone. It wasn't a plane. It was too low to be a plane because it was at treetop level. It wasn't a drone. It wasn't an air light. Nothing of that nature. So the Hudson Valley area, I call it the Area 51 of the East Coast. There is so many mysterious things going on in that Hudson Valley area that I'll tell you, ufology should really, really take a look at that.
Yeah. Now, Chris, in terms of the lake and so forth, and you mentioned the nitrates or anything, any ideas why that would be increased? Is there anything about the area that's...
No, we thought possibly because, people, it's a very kind of secluded area. We thought, well, maybe people would have runoff with, their fertilizer and things of that nature, which could cause, some of that. But we kind of took a look, and we don't believe that's the case. We don't understand. And here's the thing. The bloom is in the middle of the lake. It should, technically it should be at the shoreline, but it's in the middle of it, and it's in a circle. So you tell me.
Did MUFON send in a dive team?
Yeah, they won't allow it. The place. Here's the other thing. Where this lake is, it's a village, but you can't get into the village. It's not a gated community. It's an actual village. The state of New York has public roads. They have their own police force. But if you try to enter there, you're stopped at a gate. And a police officer, not a security officer, comes out and asks you what your business is. And you have to be escorted to the person's house that you're visiting and escorted back.
Any idea why that would be?
Yes,
why
because years ago, one of the most secret labs in the United States was built there by a guy by the name of Alfred Loomis. Alfred Loomis was a billionaire and a brilliant physicist, and he created a secret lab there called the Tower Building. And he brought in Albert Einstein, he brought in Federico Fermi, and what he did was they made the equations for the atomic bomb there. The bomb was built down Los Alamos, but the actual equations for it and everything were done right there in the Hudson Valley. And they have think tanks there. They've had Livermore Land was founded right there in the Hudson Valley. All the Rand Corporation had dealings with them there. MIT had dealings with them all there. He brought in all these. Matter of fact, when World War II was over with and the Nazi scientists were brought over on Operation Paperclip, that's where they were brought to the Hudson Valley area, and then they were dispersed out from there. But it's the like I said, it's the Area 51 of the East Coast. It's hidden in plain sight.
Wow.
Can I get a question in here? Chris, there's a lake, I don't know if this has any connection, that's in, I guess it's the Hudson Valley, but it's eastern New York. And I discovered it when we were researching our flap area case, as we call it, in western Connecticut, which has now extended about 330 square miles in the last 16 years since we've been investigating it, and includes much of the southern Hudson Valley. It's called Nuclear Lake.
Yes, absolutely.
What's that about? I mean, is there any connection to any case that you're aware of, or is it just a weird name?
Yes, it's actually it's coordinated. A person I know very well who studies UFOs kind of said, Chris, maybe you should start looking at Nuclear Lake too, because here's the other thing that we found. When we started doing the UFO sightings in the Hudson Valley area, this particular road, we couldn't figure out why we were getting so many sightings at this particular road, Longview Road. What were they interested in? Why were people going outside, seeing UFOs hovering in their fields, in their backyard, everything? It was just crazy. Well, what we found out was on this road that I believe it was, I can't remember the company's name, it'll come to me, but they built a hidden nuclear reactor inside part of the mountain right there on Longview Road. They called it a biomedical center, but it had a nuclear reactor. Well, the nuclear reactor leaked and went into the water reservoir.
Wow.
But as you know, the unidentified press are very, very interested in our nuclear work. Well, here we had a nuclear reactor sitting on this road that nobody knew about, hidden in plain sight again, built inside the mountain, that started leaking, and they didn't discover it until somebody tested, I guess, the reservoir water and discovered, holy cow, there's a high concentration of radiation in this. So they had to dig the entire reactor out. Once they took the reactor out, the sightings dropped in that particular area. And now, how you connect that with Nuclear Lake? Nuclear Lake also has a high concentration of radiation, and there's been a ton of sightings. People have called me and said, Nuclear Lake. But here's the other thing, too. Try to get in around Nuclear Lake, you'll get stopped by the police.
Oh, really? Well, we were planning a hike. I guess we can put that on the shelf.
Well, a person that I know very well has told me, says, Chris, I was absolutely stopped there, questioned why I was there, what am I doing there, everything at that lake. And he will not go back.
Okay, I think we've stumbled on something that we can have you on for a whole show about. Okay, and thank you so much for calling in, and we're definitely going to schedule something with you, Chris. Found information here, and so Rick, have we covered Peter's questions?
That was Peter's main question. The other one we're going to handle with Deb Rooney when she's on her show.
Okay, very good. Well, Chris, thank you very much for calling. It's great to make your acquaintance, and we're going to be in touch about a whole show with you.
Well, great. Well, I was looking forward to it. Take care, guys. Good luck.
Okay, very
Bye,
good.
Chris.
Now, it's interesting because we were talking about the flap area case in central Connecticut, and our first question was from one of our show reporters there, Phil. And there's a follow-up here from Phil, who had asked originally about strange people who come and do just what Chris was describing and tell you to leave the area and that sort of thing and who they are and what it's about. And we have a follow-up from Phil on that. Ben, are you doing the producer thing, or can you read the question?
I can read. I have the ability to. Sure. So the question is, I've experienced these guys once in Milton, Connecticut, a very rural section of Litchfield near the Goshen line. I was driving, and they told me to turn around. They looked like police, but they clearly weren't. The uniforms didn't fit, and the police insignias were incorrect. The one guy, quote-unquote, who talked to me seemed like a character from a 1930s movie. It is so hard to explain. He said, you will have to turn around and go back. Very weird. You know what? It almost sounds like one of those Men in Black experiences, or anything that was reported in I'm drawing a blank. Point Pleasant, West Virginia, right? Or Air Force officers showing up at people's houses, but their insignias were wrong. Were acting kind of funny and strange.
Yeah.
So I mean, who knows?
Who knows? It's really one of the oddest aspects of these things.
There was a case in San Jose where a woman had seen something, and she was at a bar, and men came in dressed as military. This is 1981. And their insignias on their lapels were just random letters. They didn't spell a word, and they were interrogating her in there. So it's not just out there. It's a phenomenon.
Well, we've been asked many times, have we had experiences of that kind with Men in Black or something like that? And all I can say, and you were still living at home when things like this were going on.
Oh, yeah.
There would be utility workers who would show up, in this case from National Grid, which is our local Eastern New England, one of them anyway, of power companies. Our relatives in the UK laugh because they have the same supplier. And they would show up at the door, and a military type guy, and with ID in National Grid, with a National Grid truck, and they wanted to come in and install something on our meter, which is not too crazy, but I would always check, being somewhat paranoid after all these years. And I would call it, and then National Grid wouldn't know who they were. And by the time I got back to the door, they were gone. So something fishy was going on. And then they started tearing up the streets around here, and I had to let them in. Whatever. I don't know. But as far as actual Men in Black, that kind of thing, I don't really think so. So let's move on to a question from. This is really interesting. This is from Todd in Ohio. Ben, if you'd, can you do it, or should I?
Would you be so kind?
Sure. All right. Number one from Todd. Please talk a little bit about this topic, the mysterious book by Chan Thomas, Adam and Eve. Now, when I saw this, this really hit a nerve, because I have read this book, and it was supposedly written about 1963, and it's really quite interesting. Now, Chan Thomas, whom I cannot find out much about, actually was supposed to be a scientist working on some secret government program that looked at geological upheavals in the history of the Earth. And the conclusions that they supposedly came up with were very controversial, that there had been 6 epochs in human history where we had gone from, as we say, stone tools to power tools several times. Now in 1963, that was really quite controversial. There'd been Uspensky and Velikovsky and other people who'd been writing about things like this, but they were considered to be cranks, starting in the 1940s. A Venus hitting the Earth, or pole shifts and things of this kind that had wiped out humanity and come back. That had all been considered crank stuff. Today, it's not so much. It's been written about widely. But in 1963, supposedly, he was talking about 6 different times that had happened. And First Nations people will tell you their belief that it maybe has happened 4 times, or the same sort of thing. So today, everybody writes about that. But in the 1960s, Eric Van Daniken hadn't even written Chariot of the Gods yet, at least in the early 60s. And this was new stuff. supposedly the CIA put the clamps down on this because it was if it got out that the government was studying this stuff and believed it, religion would turn upside down and therefore society would. Now it's a different world today. Organized religion doesn't have that kind of social influence anymore, I don't think, and people wouldn't really care that much. People believe all kinds of things anyway. So, but at the time, I mean, I've never been able to find out much about it. He gets into ancient languages. It's very, very well written, very erudite, and it's very articulate. And if it's legit, I cannot find out much about Chan Thomas, whether he was really working on any program or not. But that would be normal for the time, unless somebody was really famous. Their name would not be prominent. So that's what I know about that book. I have no reason to believe it's not legitimate, but I can't prove that it is either. So, but it is worth reading. As a matter of fact, I was astounded. There it is on Amazon Kindle. You can get it on Kindle for like $9. And I would like to do that and then find out if this is the same book that I read. Because you never know with these things. You know, because I read it and I got a copy of it in the 70s, after it had already supposedly been clamped on. So I don't know. So that's what I know about that, Todd. But excellent question. Anybody else have any comments on that?
I actually just got an education there, so I appreciate it.
Well, that's what we hope to do on the show. So
May I see the question?
Sure.
Please.
And he also has a second question, Todd from Ohio.
Sure. Mysterious book. Oh, okay. Yeah, this is actually. You know, it's funny. I've weirdly been doing research into this, kind of coincidentally. There's a really interesting thing because I've never read the book, but from what it sounds like, I think it was written around the time that the Ugaritic language was discovered.
Oh yes.
So which is a lot of them are branches of ancient Sumerian, which is a branch off of ancient Akkadian.
Yeah.
And so no language is one-to-one, but there's words that are used that are similar. So there's like really interesting things, and I heard a rumor, I don't know how true it is, that you can actually get like a full ride to many universities to learn for Assyriology, to learn ancient languages because they found all these clay tablets that
nobody speaks them anymore.
No.
Or not nobody. Your Uncle Bob did.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he spoke Syriac fluently. Probably for academic reasons.
Oh yeah, it's because you can get a full ride. You can read through these clay tablets and use it for translation. 90% of them are like shopping lists and trade logs and things.
Oh yeah, business deals. And
right, yeah,
contracts.
It's very boring, but occasionally you'll find interesting things, especially about Baal. That's a fun one.
Yeah,
and Baal, which
something's never changed, right?
No, but it's interesting because the word Baal isn't necessary. It just means Lord. So you could say because you can read through ancient languages and you see Baal mentioned a couple of times, and really it just means it's just a different word for the word Lord.
Wait, but you're talking about Baal as in getting out of jail, right? No. You're talking about Baal the god.
Yeah.
Baal or Baal the god. Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's technically pronounced Baal.
Yeah, that's the way my third grade teacher pronounced it.
Right. Baal, whatever. So it's essentially just means Lord. Which is a fun sort of thing, and now there's sort of interesting.
Adonai does too,
right?
Hebrew, it just means
so
Lord.
it's fascinating stuff, and
it is,
and the more you kind of read about it, and you look at the Epic of Gilgamesh, and all these other things.
Well, that's the next part of the question.
Yes, which is does the biblical Esau represent a different race of man? Thanks for the possible tie-ins. Thanks. Possible tie-ins with Enkidu.
Yes, Enkidu was the a companion of Gilgamesh. Okay, now I don't want to get too esoteric here on the show, but these are ancient stories, ancient Sumerian stories, and from the Akkadian or Akkadian Empire, which was the first known empire in the Western world. I mean, you can argue that China had an empire before that, and does again. But in any case, he was Enkidu was a companion of Gilgamesh, and these were great heroes. Did all these amazing things. You can still get you can read the Epic of Gilgamesh in English, and they were there was a reference in Genesis to the heroes of old.
Oh, yes.
Descendants of the Nephilim or the giants. And this stuff is all in Genesis, too.
Yes.
So, and in Hebrew, it's really wild when you read it. But
oh, yeah, especially when you get into the giant wars, or as the Greeks call it, gigantomachy.
Yeah, right. So this really ties into the first question about this book, because there are all sorts of things like that this Chan Thomas supposedly discovered, and the government was working on. So I don't know, but who knows about this stuff? But that's who that was. But as far as Esau was concerned, I didn't quite get from Todd if this was his meaning, but these were the sons of Jacob. I should say the sons of Isaac. There was Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the founders of the Hebrew race. And the sons of Jacob, I should say the sons of Isaac, were Jacob and Esau. And the Bible makes a reference to Esau as being a very hairy man, literally. And so Isaac couldn't see very well, and the story is that Jacob faked him out, because Jacob was a little bit younger, wasn't going to get the inheritance and that sort of thing. So he got a skin of a sheep and put it on his arm so that his poor father would think he was Esau, and gave him his blessing and gave him all the dough, right? So the sheep and stuff. So that was considered. I mean, to this day, traditionally, that is the reason why Arabs and Israelis don't get along. Sometimes a scholar would say it goes all the way back to that incident with Jacob and Esau a zillion years ago. So that's a story there. But whether Esau was a different species, I mean, they were both sons of Isaac. I mean, the guy wouldn't have been a Bigfoot or anything, or a Neanderthal. I mean, who knows? It just, he just got had a really hairy arm, I guess. I don't know whether it was a different species, but yes, nevertheless, a good question. I've never heard it asked before. So.
Well, I believe before I make a comment, we should go to our break.
Oh, good idea. We're having such fun. I missed the break. Anyway, you're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben and Rick Eno on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM in New England's gorgeous Blackstone River Valley. Stick with us. We'll be right back with more open lines.
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to The Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade. The finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
Local and live at 99.5 FM.
Okay, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul, Ben, and Rick Eno. Today we're doing open lines with some really interesting questions from a lot of different people. And is that it for Todd's questions?
Yes, but I had a comment.
You had a comment.
I have a comment. And the comment is, I think our understanding of history is flawed. Typically, right, there's the sort of the line that's toed by most historians that, we were hunter-gatherers, and then out of nowhere we kind of just got power tools and boom, civilization. What's interesting is, I think the discovery of, now I'm blanking on the name of the ancient site that was found. That's probably the oldest ancient site ever found. Göbekli Tepe. Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you, Dos Enos, for helping me. So the interesting thing about Göbekli Tepe, and I never thought of this until I heard it mentioned in a lecture I was listening to, that around this time period, it is believed that humans just kind of wandered around and kind of just picked stuff up and hunted and gathered, and that's about what they did. So something, for someone to set up a site, right, so it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and if you study the area around it, there's no real reason for it to be there, right? There's no logical explanation. There's not really a lot of running water. There's no real way to do any sort of agriculture because it's in a desert. So it's like, what do you do with this? It doesn't make a ton of sense if you go by, okay, well, we had their humans that need food, check. They hunt and gather, check. And then it's like, but they set up a place made out of stones, which means they're there often. And if you look around, there's even, I believe they even discovered sort of foundations of houses that were there. So they even set up dwellings there for if you're in a tribe, right, you're wandering around, you'll tend to have rival tribes or enemies or something. So staying in one place is super dangerous. And so something had to happen for them to stop moving and go and set up what looks like some sort of site. Now, I know that there's pictographs on there, or essentially, drawing.
Yeah, very different kinds from other civilizations.
Right, and there's no written language. There's no really, they haven't really figured out the symbolism of all the animals that are drawn there. But the fact remains that, they decided, well, we're going to set up a site here, and then they stayed. Which isn't too different from how, let's say, the ancient Greeks functioned, right? You have some guy, running around from Athens, and he sees Pan there, and Pan says, "Hey, guy, I want you to build a temple to me." And he's like, "All right, sure." and so they build a temple. So how we view history is flawed, I think, because we look at things from our very limited materialistic perspective and say, okay, well, they must be doing this because, we need food and shelter, therefore they need food and shelter. Boom, done. How the ancients experienced life, I would argue, is very, very different than how we experience life. And, that's why I think it's like, I think it's kind of a cop-out to say aliens did everything. Because it's like, we can't know how somebody existed, 100 years ago, right? I like to make this joke because I saw this thing. Someone found a cookbook from 1890, and for whatever reason they put eggs in everything. I don't know why, but they did. So someone made lemonade, and for whatever reason it called for 3 eggs, and it's absolutely disgusting. And so it's hard for us to understand things, not even 100 years ago, 50 years ago, versus today. How can we understand how people lived 10,000 years ago? It's idiotic. It doesn't make any sense. It's like, you can have your basic hierarchy of human needs, but at the same time, understanding what it's like to be that person, we can't know. We can know what it's like to be ourselves in that situation. That's for sure. But we don't know how an ancient person lived.
Rick, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I was going to say it's fascinating comment, Ben, because I think, first of all, that they were much more intact and focused on their spirituality. But when you mentioned Göbekli Tepe, the one thing that has always kind of blown me away, and I can't come up with it, that entire area was meticulously buried. They didn't find bodies there, from what I understand. But they meticulously buried, almost to the point where stones were placed purposely in certain areas to cover over without destroying what was underneath. And one would think, why would they do this, and why would they invest their time that way? And to point out what you're just saying, we're never going to understand it. But when you look at how they lived and why things went down the way, I don't know that we ever will. But there's definitely a mystery there, and I think it's far beyond probably where we are today to comprehend it, unless we had a glimpse into that time. I don't know. And then one other piece to that is you mentioned earlier about getting scholarships to universities for these ancient languages. Something people might want to check out on Linda Moulton Howe's site. She does a review of this supposed basalt structure found in the Antarctic. And what's interesting about that is in the reports and in the interviews, they talk about the military escorting personnel with rare languages, ancient languages, to the site to decode what's on the wall, and they cycle them in and cycle them out. And the reason I'm pointing that in is if you're going to go study ancient languages and get that scholarship, you may be going there.
Yeah, that's in Turkey, and we did a show. I wish, and I know when we were going to talk about this, I would have had the show at my fingertips. But in our show archives, there's a show. I believe it was from 2017 with Linda Moulton Howe, a science journalist. And the last show we did with her was about Göbekli Tepe, and she'd actually been there in Turkey and participated in the research and seen a lot of the stuff firsthand. So you can go to behindtheparanormal.com and look for that.
Sorry, I caught you unawares, Father. That's how you know this is live radio.
Well, I don't know how to do a search on my phone. If you're on a computer, you can search for Linda Moulton Howe or Göbekli Tepe, which nobody can spell. So just Linda Moulton Howe. Okay, very good. What do we have next there, Ben?
So next we have Doug from Texas, and he writes, "Greetings, gentlemen," and greetings to you as well. I have a somewhat philosophical question. Paul, you have often stated, how can you be you without your body? Although you make a valid point, I can't help but question the out-of-body experience. It's a good question. Mm-hmm. There are numerous accounts of people's spirit, soul, consciousness, or whatever, floating above their seemingly lifeless bodies. Can you explain these experiences from a multiverse perspective? Is there perhaps some validity to the notion of astral body? Is there a multiverse equivalent to a so-called astral body? Thanks. Sincerely, Doug from Texas.
Doug, excellent questions. I've actually considered that because I've talked to a lot of people, and so have most of us, who have had particularly experiences in the operating room where they're being operated on, or they're dying or something, and then they're floating above their bodies and looking down and all this sort of thing, or variations on that theme. Now the question is, and at the risk of confirmation bias here, what is really the mechanism behind this process? I have known a lot of people, several of them very dear friends. I'm thinking of Scott Rogo and a friend of mine in Warwick, whom I've just recently contact with after some years, who would routinely have out-of-the-body experiences, and some would literally travel around looking in people's windows, not really trying to, whatever they were, the motivations were. This is how that would kind of happen. There was often a fear they would not get back to their bodies. There was a principle, particularly in the spiritualism and other aspects of this, where there is the so-called silver cord that connects you, much as a baby has an umbilical cord, would connect you with your body. In spiritualism, there is the notion of the astral body, and I think in a lot of ways they just couldn't figure any other way that this would work. And the astral body is almost a platonic copy of your physical body.
Yeah, it sounds like Plato.
yeah, exactly. And it would have all the characteristics, except in a sort of a spiritual way. And, maybe that's true. I've never seen any evidence of that. I think there are other explanations. But the question is, are you really out of your body looking down in your body? Maybe not. Maybe there's some other explanation for that. The notion, the initial question that Doug submits, that I ask, is, without your body, would you still be you? In other words, and maybe this is my theological training, but the importance of the body and the physical nature is stressed very, very strongly in ancient Christianity and in a lot of ancient religions. Today you've got this dualism where essentially matter is bad and spirit is good. But it's really
opposite.
And the opposite sometimes. But what it really is, and now we know matter is really just another form of energy. So, but in our particular corner of the multiverse, in our particular world, there is the notion that the laws of physics would not permit the entire personality of someone to be outside the body, in its full form. And so that's the key to my answer, is that I've never said that it is impossible to exist outside the body, but it is impossible for the totality of the person to exist outside the body. All right, all memories, all the full notion, and we have to be careful of the island theory, as we call it, that all of us is contained just within our brains and our bodies. That's why we get boggled with things like extrasensory perception, ESP, and we have trouble believing that because we're all supposed to be self-contained and not connected with one another. That is a very modern concept because that did not exist very often in more ancient civilizations. So the answer is up in the air. Personally, I think, pardon the pun, but I think that the whole notion that we can exist outside our bodies fully is not legitimate, but partially, perhaps. I will point out that when these experiences take place, they tend to be rather brief. All right. There is the notion of the flashing nexus, as we call it. That's a term we had to coin in order to explain it, because I'd never heard of it before. That people will be not only outside their bodies, but will actually be other people for brief periods, up to 30 seconds sometimes. And this is something I talk about in my last book, Dancing Past the Graveyard. So I think the jury is out on that, but I think there are aspects to be considered that a lot of people don't consider. Rick?
I have a question. I have a question for you, and Ben, actually, both of you, because it's not an area that I've studied well. But the idea of the near-death experience, how is that different from a deep meditative state?
Ben, do you want to take that?
Well, my first things first. I'm gonna counter Doug's question with another question, which is, what is a body?
Right.
Which is. Looks like you're receiving a phone call. I don't know who from. Maybe
Peter Robbins is calling.
Oh, lovely.
Why don't we do something different and answer the call?
He's calling the wrong line.
Yeah. Is he?
He is.
Hello, Peter. Peter Robbins, folks. We're on the air, and Peter Robbins is a very dear friend and one of the major theological figures in the UFO field. So we have open lines today, and I know you want to talk to me about something else, but this is the time to call into the show. So
it's going to sound terrible, but okay.
Yes. First, hello to everybody in your audience. Second, yes, I did want to talk to you about something else, and I will get back to you on that. But otherwise, what an interesting moment we find ourselves in the world of UFO history.
In live radio.
Well, we had, I don't know if you know Chris DiPerno from New York, MUFON, because you live in New York.
Absolutely. He's a dear friend and colleague, and I'm crazy about him.
Well, this is your lucky day, because he called in earlier, we had a great conversation, and we're going to do a separate show with him.
Oh, terrific. Yeah, he is one of our most reliable and respected New York State-based UFO investigators, and as you know, he has a background in law enforcement, and can't ask for better than Chris. No question about it.
Excellent. Well, Peter, I'll call you after the show, after 1 o'clock, that is. And
sounds great.
After we're off the air, we look forward to talking with you. I look forward to having you back on the show soon.
Thanks, my friend, and happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers listening.
And all the men, too.
Yes, that too.
Okay.
Bye for now, guys.
All right, bye-bye. You couldn't have planned that.
No, well, it's live radio.
So go ahead, Ben.
So my question would be, what is a body? And I think this is another thing that we grossly misunderstand. I think we unfortunately have the habit of divvying things up and saying, well, this doesn't equal this because these two things are very different. And I would argue that it is not different. I would argue that how we understand what a body is flawed. Because there are two different portions of body. There's the fleshy part, and then there's a different part that exists at the same time, right? So I think it's not fair to assume that it's like, okay, well, you got body and spirit, that's it. Because the two kind of have to function together, right? It's not like two separate beings living in the same place. It's like it's part of the same whole, right? I'd argue that the spirit is part of the body, because the body is not just, the gooey, fleshy things. It's also the things that come along with it, which are the abilities and powers of understanding other things, right? So, ancients viewed the body as, the ability to do things, right? Feet represented the ability to move. Having a face represented the ability to speak. Having eyes, for example, eyes are gushy, circular things in your head, but also they give you the ability to see. And so with that, the body includes a whole sort of nexus of potentialities and powers inside of having a body, right? There's also the flesh, which is a portion of that, but it's not exactly everything in the mix, because there's a whole bunch of other portions of the human experience that are outside of having a fleshy body. Am I right? The issue, I think, is an understanding, right, these very, very high concepts of, okay, well, if I have, have this fleshy thing, how do spirit things come from fleshy thing? Because it's all part of the same thing. Because the body is more than just your gooey, fleshy parts. It's all about the experiences you have too, right? It's like, yeah, sure, there's science behind it, right? We know that there are nerve endings in your fingers that connect directly to your brain. But the thing is, that's all part of the experience. Arguably, you could say, well, it's spiritual because it's not something that's happening empirically, but we know it's there. And we know that we breathe air and the air exists. We know that air is there and we can study it if we want, but it's something that we participate in physically, but also in that same sense, it's also a portion of the body. I hope I'm not rambling too much.
I get it.
The whole point is how our basic understanding of basic things is flawed, and we have to keep that in mind. Because yes, I agree with you, Father. I'm with you all the way. But I think the problem isn't that how can you be you without your body? I think the problem is, what is your body? What is our body?
Good point. Yeah.
I think that's the statement that we need to define first before we understand how can you be you without your body. And it's more than that, because technically we're all part of the same body. I've heard the sort of anecdotal thing like, oh well, we're all just microbes living on the earth as a body, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, or something to that effect. It's like, okay, yeah, that's true. I agree with that. I'd argue that then we're all part of that same body.
Yeah, the whole Gaia thing. I want to let Rick get in here, but just one more point on this issue. The notion of remote viewing, where psychics will supposedly see things at a distance, military targets, what other people are doing, things like that. And I've known people who've done that. And the same question would arise. I mean, is that the same? Is that an out-of-the-body experience, or are they just perceiving something where, from a parallel reality where they are there or whatever? So the same thing, hovering over the body and looking down, is that a form of remote viewing?
Well, it's similar to, I'm going to loop this back. The color blue did not exist 2,500 years ago. Everyone saw it as white. If you look at, Homer writing about the Mediterranean Sea, he says it's burgundy or purple. And there are even African tribes that still they look up at the sky and they see it as white because they don't perceive the color blue. Now, does that mean the color blue doesn't exist? No, because you're wearing a blue shirt right now, and so am I, actually, and Rick's got a blue tie. But for whatever reason, it's the perception of it. And they can be taught this perception. There's actually really interesting scientific studies on this, that once they see the color blue, they initially see it and they think it's either green or white, and then when they're told it's blue and they see it a bunch of times, then they see it everywhere and they don't stop seeing it. Now, what we perceive is that's the question. And is it out of the body experiences, from what I understand, they're very physical at the same time. It's not just all spiritual stuff. And so it's throwing all sorts of monkey wrenches into this idea that, it's just all a bunch of spirits and that's it. And it's like, we need to go back to basics and kind of understand the foundations, or at least question the foundations of how we even perceive reality at all.
Yeah, Rick?
So I guess I'd go back to that. So when I listen to this, it makes a lot of sense. But the one thing I'll come back to is I'm trying to, for myself, divvy up where a near-death experience versus a deep meditative state. Now, I've never achieved a deep meditative state. I'm going to be up front right now. I've also never almost died. So I don't have a bearing for that. But, Paul, I know you and Ben have achieved deep meditative states. I don't know if you've achieved the other one. I hope not. But if you have, or if you have knowledge that you could share about what the difference is, that would help me in my path to understanding.
Well, there may not be that much difference, actually.
Yeah.
I learned to meditate from the Trappist monks of all people in Spencer, Massachusetts, not far from where we sit. And the principles are really basic. Ben and I have also done that at the Zen monastery, which we happen to have one in Cumberland, Rhode Island. A lot of people don't realize. And meditation exercises take place there. And I never found it all that much different from what the Trappists were saying. So it's kind of a human thing. It is rather simple, the quieting of the mind. And Ben, you could describe it.
Yeah, I've learned about it from multiple sources. Not just the Zen Buddhists, but I was also hung around with Aztec shaman for a while. That was a grand old time, and just kind of I hung around in many different circles and kind of picked up tips and tricks here and there. And ultimately, I kind of came to the conclusion that all that experience is well and great, and I experienced some really cool stuff. And I don't know if it was the same as a near-death experience because I've never experienced it. Pardon the play on words, but arguably I found that just quieting the mind and seeing reality for what it is. I guess it's called mindfulness now. Which is very, that's pretty much what it comes down to. I think we tend to deceive ourselves into seeing things that aren't really there, a lot, and just focusing on reality itself and understanding, or at least attempting to understand, our perception at least, perceiving that we don't perceive things correctly. There we go. And just being mindful of that, and mindful of ourselves.
Okay, yeah. Well, more on that as we go. Next week, perhaps, when we have a second open line show. But right now, we're out of time, and we better get to our announcements. Okay?
Yes, and we always have a plethora of announcements. And I'm looking at the question sheet, and that's not correct. So our 5th neighborhood meeting in what we refer to as the Pennsylvania Triangle or the Du Bois Triangle, which was supposed to take place yesterday, has been postponed and will be rescheduled. We'll update you and have more information as time goes on.
Our new book, work on this continues, Behind the Paranormal 3, Uneasy Skies. Also contributing will be several of our colleagues, and the book will contain the best of our interviews over our many years with the greatest researchers in the UFO field, Stan Friedman, Peter Robbins, who just called in accidentally, as well as some of our own experiences.
For a great live radio moment.
Yeah. Look for the book release late this year or early next year.
And you can check out our current books, along with those of our other co-hosts at our show website, BehindTheParanormal.com, where you also can find out more about the show, our many cases over the years, our public appearances, and how to book us, along with some of our 900-plus free recorded shows from our 12-plus years on the air, including our 4.5-year run on CBS Radio, along with special shows and podcasts.
So, Rick, what's going on with you?
Well, right now, to be honest, I've got a couple cases I just finished that we were talking about triangle UFOs earlier. I've got a couple of cigar-shaped UFOs that have been recorded out in the western part of California, so I've been looking at that. And then hopefully I'll have a report on some of these star sightings that I'm working on in the Bay Area, where people are seeing them scintillate, if you will, or move in weird directions. So I'm reviewing that and seeing what I can come up with, and I'll be happy to report on it later on in one of the shows.
Well, we'll look forward to that. Now, we've reloaded recorded shows into the archives at BehindTheParanormal.com because there were all kinds of tech issues over the last few years. We got them back to 2009. We're starting to get some of the 2008 ones on there, and as well as special shows and podcasts. The links aren't all quite set up yet, but we will. And we're also completely redesigning, and it's none too soon, the New England Ghosts website, which is our main site as investigative team. So,
okie dokie.
So a charity page as well.
Yes, we have many charities upon our website charity page, with links to several good causes we have adopted on the show. Now we have added a new charity, Hope for Hilldale Cemetery in Haverhill, Massachusetts, which is run by our good friend
Tom Spitaleri.
Spitaleri, who's unfortunately we had to cancel Parafest this year, and that would have gone to help him out. But you can also check out all of the other charities that we have on there, and that's BehindTheParanormal.com.
So what do we have for next week, Ben?
So next week, May 16th, we'll bring you the second of our duo open line shows with guest co-host Shane Sirois, who will be back with us that week.
That's right. And I guess we can, we don't have any time, I guess, for our quote again this week, but I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno.
And I'm Rick Eno, filling in for Shane. Thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we'll see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now. Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.